Nearly 4 decades ago, on a warm summer morning in 1984, the life of a young woman was violently cut short. Judy Weichert, full of promise and loved by many, was brutally assaulted, beaten, and murdered. A crime so horrific that it shocked the Oklahoma City community to its core. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into years, the case slipped further into the shadows, leaving her family and friends grasping for answers that have never come. The unsolved murder of Judy Weichert has haunted not only her loved ones, but also the investigators who never found her killer. It remains a mystery, buried beneath the weight of time, with no new leads, no closure, and no justice. But even as the decades stretch on, the echoes of that fateful day have not faded. The question still hangs in the air. Who killed Judy Weichert, and why have they never been brought to justice? Welcome to Fireside Unsolved, Episode 107, The Unsolved Murder of Judy Weichert. On the morning of July 28, 1984, the sun had barely risen when 33-year-old Judy Weichert laced up her running shoes and quietly slipped out of her home. Her plan was to go for a long jog near Sundance Air Park in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, a place familiar to her, yet eerily isolated at that early hour. But for Judy, she had empty road ahead and no one around to bother her. Perfect conditions for a dedicated runner. Judy was in the midst of training for a marathon, and that morning she had set a challenging goal for herself of 16 miles. While she ran, her husband, Steve Weichert, stayed behind in bed, opting for a few more hours of rest, unaware that this decision would be one he'd question for the rest of his life. The couple was newly married, having tied the knot in September of 1983. Judy worked as a lease record analyst for Eason Oil Company, while Steve pursued a career in music and co-owned a restaurant where the couple had first met. It was a life filled with potential, but that morning's jog would mark the beginning of a tragedy that would shatter the world they had begun to build. According to the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, Judy was discovered on the side of Sarah Road, just beyond Northwest 122nd Street, at approximately 9:45 a.m. A man and a woman, simply passing by, stumbled upon the horrific scene. Judy, clinging to what little life she had left. She had been brutally assaulted and stabbed up to 30 times in a vicious attack. But what stood out, possibly even more than the violence inflicted on her, was the sheer will she displayed in her final moments. After the brutal attack, Judy was left to die in a remote field, far from help. Yet somehow she managed to crawl toward the side of the road, inching closer and closer while cars drove by, completely oblivious to her agony. As emergency services rushed to the scene, Judy, despite being on the brink of death, summoned the strength to speak. With what remained of her fading breath, she gave a crucial clue to her rescuers, a description of the man who had done this to her. "A white guy in a blue car," she managed to utter, her voice weak but clear enough to leave behind a vital piece of evidence. The determination to survive, even after such unimaginable brutality, astounded those who worked on her case. "The sheer will to survive and try to get somebody to help is just astonishing to me," said Amanda Newland Davis, a criminologist who spent 6 years delving into the tragic mystery of Judy Weichert's murder. Surgeons at Mercy Health Center fought to save Judy's life for hours, but her wounds were too severe. Despite their best efforts, later that afternoon, Judy died from her injuries, her brave fight for life coming to a heartbreaking end. In the days that followed, Oklahoma City mourned the loss of a vibrant soul. Her funeral was held at Resurrection Cemetery Chapel, where friends and family gathered to say their final goodbyes. Judy was laid to rest in a quiet, peaceful corner of the cemetery. Her husband, Steve, had a marble headstone placed at her grave, etched with the words, "My Golden Runner," a tribute to the passion that had once filled her days. The headstone depicted a female runner, a symbol of Judy's spirit, alongside an armadillo, a creature Judy had a fondness for, immortalizing her love for both nature and movement. As Judy was being laid to rest, another process began simultaneously, the search for the person responsible for the brutal act of violence that had claimed Judy's life. The police wasted no time, and the Oklahoma City Police Department quickly took the lead, forming a special task force dedicated to solving the case. Their first move was to issue a region-wide alert, warning women to avoid jogging alone for the time being. A reward was offered for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Judy's killer, with a deadline set for October of the same year. Everyone believed the case would be solved swiftly, justice would be served, and life could return to normal. But it didn't. One of the first suspects questioned by police was Judy's husband, Steve Weichert. As the husband and last person to see her alive, suspicion initially fell on him. A scenario all too common in cases like this. But he was quickly cleared of any involvement. With Steve dismissed as a suspect, investigators turned their focus elsewhere. They scoured the community for leads, hoping the killer would be someone close by, someone whose capture was only a matter of time. For a while, phone calls poured into the task force as tips and sightings of potential suspects were reported. The hope of solving the case remained high in those first crucial months. But as time passed, the flurry of early activity slowed, and the once-strong task force dwindled. As the first anniversary of Judy's murder came and went, only 2 investigators remained working the case. The killer remained free to walk the streets, and a community was left with the unnerving reality that justice might never come. Regardless, armed with the description Judy Weichert had managed to give before her death, the investigators continued canvassing the area relentlessly, and by 1985, investigators believed they had finally found their prime suspect, a man named Jeffrey Todd Pierce. Jeffrey Todd Pierce, a white man who drove a blue truck, had recently been accused of another violent assault on a woman in the area. Though authorities would later revise their belief, thinking the suspect had driven a blue Volkswagen Beetle and not a blue truck, Pierce fit the bill well enough to spark intense interest. So almost immediately, the detectives working Judy's case with no solid leads hear about this suspect in a separate case and quickly tie the two together, explained criminologist Amanda Newland Davis. To investigators, the connection seemed undeniable. At the time of the trial, the forensic expert working on the case, Joyce Gilchrist, testified that she believed a hair left at the crime scene of Pierce's 1985 assault also matched a hair found at the scene of Judy's murder. For the police, this was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. They were eager to close the book on Judy's case, and with a matching hair and having already been convicted for the other woman's assault, they were confident they had their man for Judy's killing. Amanda Newland Davis said, "They really wanted him for Judy's case and in fact told everybody that was asking the question, 'Hey, what's going on with Judy's case?' that they didn't need to worry about it. They said he'll be in prison for the next 60 years on this other case." And with that, many within the department felt certain the long nightmare was over. The murderer had been caught, and although terribly sad, justice was served. Except with time, they would find out that their confidence was tragically misplaced. 15 years after his conviction for the 1985 assault, the case came under new scrutiny. Advances in forensic technology that didn't exist during his original trial now allowed for a more detailed examination of the evidence. Joyce Gilchrist's analysis of the hairs found in both the assault conviction, as well as the hair found at the scene of Judy's murder, were disputed in 2001 by an FBI review. DNA testing was then conducted on evidence from the crime scene from the 1985 assault, conclusively proving Pierce's innocence and implicating another man for the crime. Then DNA analysis was returned from the hair found at Judy's crime scene, and shockingly, the hair was actually not human at all. It was an animal hair. The DNA that was initially thought to link Pierce to Judy's murder didn't match. None of it did. 15 years after his conviction, Pierce walked free. Now, nearly 40 years later, the search for justice continues. Despite the hundreds of leads that poured in over the years, there have been no further arrests or suspects. The trail grew colder with each passing year, and eventually, the case was relegated to the ColdCase division, where it remains, frozen in time, unresolved. The decades have taken their toll. Weichert's loved ones, who once clung to hope, have begun to pass away. Her mother, Margaret, died in 2015, never knowing who took her daughter's life. Her father, Joseph, followed in 2018, his questions left forever unanswered. Even Steve, who had remarried in 2001, passed away due to cancer in 2013. The pain of the unsolved murder of Judy Weichert lingers. Weichert's friend, Judy Cruz, remains one of the last voices crying out for the justice that has eluded them all for so long. "Let's go back and review the evidence," Cruz pleaded, her voice carrying both weariness and determination. "Give this family some kind of peace. Judy just deserved justice. That's all there is to it." Yet after all these years, the question remains, will justice ever come? Or will this case, like so many others, fade further into the past, lost in the cold corridors of time? For many, the story of Judy Weichert is still far from over. For those who still remember, the fight for justice continues. And so, the hope remains that one day, a break in the case will finally emerge, a clue long overlooked, or even an unexpected confession. Until then, the mystery of Judy Weichert's murder lives on, an unsolved crime that refuses to rest until her killer has been found. If you have any information regarding the murder of Judy Weichert, we encourage you to contact the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Unit. You can email investigators directly at tips@osbi.ok.gov Or you can call toll-free at 1-800-522-8017.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Fireside Unsolved. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to help the channel grow. Until next time, take it easy and be easy, you filthy bastards.